Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thank you for joining us to listen to this very interesting panel on building resilient small scale fisheries towards equity and justice. We thank the Ocean 20 conveners for organizing the Ocean Dialogue and opening up spaces for civil society engagements in the G20 process. And RISEUP is very happy to co-organize this event with Ilyas Dahua Project, Indonesian Traditional Fisher Folk Union KNTI, Linia Dagua, or FishNet, National Platform for Small Scale Fish Workers, Comunidad y Biodiversidad, which is COBI, to share a perspective on small scale fisheries in the context of climate change. So we all know that small scale fisheries are critical for the livelihoods, food security, and cultural heritage of coastal communities. And, and we are considerable contributors to the G20 economy as well. However, small scale fishery communities are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change and marine and coastal pollution. Climate change and pollution poses significant challenges to small scale fisheries, leading to loss of lives and livelihoods. So, considering these challenges on small scale fisheries, we bring together this diverse panel of speakers, experts who are united by their work on small scale fisheries. So, the panel will bring together a global perspective linking small scale fisheries to climate change, trying to build on some clear cut recommendations for the G20 process to follow up. So before we start, I would like to share some information to the participants about the questions and comments and suggestions they would possibly have during the webinar. So the participants can type in their questions or comments or suggestions in the chat box, not in the chat box, sorry, in the question and answer session over there. And these questions will be addressed towards the end of the webinar. And we also have the interpretation for Portuguese available for the webinar. So you may switch on to the channel which is most comfortable for you. So with this, let's get the conversation rolling. So let me introduce the first speaker to you. So as the first speaker, we've got Muniba Isaacs joining from South Africa. So Muniba is a professor with the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies at the University of Western Cape. Her research area focuses on understanding the social and political processes of blue justice for small-scale fishers, food systems, fisheries reform, marine protected areas, blue economy, and integrating social justice and biodiversity in South Africa and Southern Africa. Thank you very much, Muniba, and welcome to the webinar. So Muniba will be taking us through her thoughts on ensuring blue justice, equitable and sustainable solutions for small-scale fisheries. Over to you, Muniba.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and good afternoon if you're on my timeline, that's Central African time. If you're on the West, good morning, and the East, good afternoon, good evening. As we see from Danny, it's very dark there. So I've been thinking about the concept of blue justice for a long time, and what it means and where does it come from. So the concept of blue justice is rooted in the social, economic and political struggles for small-scale fisheries in South Africa. And this is in a post-apartheid regime. And we are now celebrating our 30 years of our democracy in South Africa, but there's a lot of struggles for small-scale fisheries in terms of their access. So my talk is going to try to unpack how I see this and relate it to small-scale fisheries. I will look at to what extent blue justice is directly related to social justice and spatial justice. So the different elements of justice that I will talk on, the different aspects of justice, is to what extent a blue justice is in terms of distributive justice, and to what extent distributive justice, well, we can look at blue justice from a social justice lens and a spatial justice lens. Then I would unpack the issue of participatory and procedural justice and look at that from a social justice and spatial justice lens. And the last one is that I would look at recognition and to what extent recognition for small-scale fisheries can be viewed from a social and spatial justice. As I said, I see spatial and social justice as blue justice. So when we look at distributive justice focuses on the uneven distribution of benefits, harms and burdens of intervention. It is specifically looking at the equitable access to land and marine resources, mainly for food in coastal communities. So a social justice lens to equitable access of this resources, opportunities, rights, and privileges for small-scale fisheries in society need to focus on the race issue. And coming from South Africa, race is all what we think of. You know, race is a big issue. So race is an important issue when we look at it from a social justice lens. Also gender, caste, if you in another part of the world, and marginalization of fishers. So equitable access to resources need to factor the issue of these three for small-scale fisheries. It is very important that therein we need to look at where the position of small-scale fisheries then is within the blue economy, because normally small-scale fisheries are seen as the poorest, and their positionality in the blue economy is often not necessarily featured. From a spatial justice, which is an intentional focus on the geographical aspects of justice and injustice. This involves a fair and equitable distribution of space, land, and natural resources. So when we look at that from a blue justice lens, we have to look at to what extent does the blue economy, marine protected areas, marine spatial planning, as a part of displacing communities from areas where they usually have access to resources and rights. To what extent are they excluded? To what extent violence is used and brutality against small-scale fishers for accessing protected areas? And to what extent small-scale fishers' lives are criminalized by the activity in terms of the fishing activity. So therein the spatial justice becomes an important aspect when we're talking about this whole expansion of the 30 by 30 and what will happen to small-scale fishers. The second aspect that I looked at is the participatory and procedural justice. And just to remind us that it is concerned with the extent to which different actors and actor groups are involved in meaningful participation in the decision-making, meaningful involvement of community and also women. So since 2008, there has been huge attention on small-scale fisheries. It is welcoming to see the extent small-scale fisheries is getting attention, right to food. South Africa had its own policy on small-scale fisheries in 2012. The 10-year guidelines, small-scale fisheries guidelines, are all strides when we look at a participatory and procedural justice from a social justice lens. All of these tools were social justice tools for small-scale fisheries. to ensure the voice of small-scale fisheries is part of decision-making structures. The women's voice are included in decision-making structures. And from a social justice lens, when we really look at participation and procedural justice, the strengthening of community-based organization and their voice becomes critical. It's not just about a seat around the table in terms of meaningful participation. It is also about looking at to what extent small-scale fisheries are part of elite capture, to what extent they are gatekeepers, questioning the representativities and roles of community-based organization, non-government organizations, and all often questioning also and being critical, are they misrepresenting small-scale fishers? So that is the questions that I would ask from a social justice lens when it comes to procedural justice for small-scale fisheries. When I move over to to spatial justice, one look at what is the governance structures at scale, local, regional, national, continental, international, and to what extent is there strengthening of the base of the voice and participation. Now, I'm sorry to say, marine spatial planning, marine protected areas, SDG, expansion of areas, multi-stakeholder platform, where agenda is set for conservation and the blue economy and extraction of resources. A seat at the table is not enough for small-scale fishers. Small-scale fishers need a voice, they need active participation, and they need these decision-making to be, when it comes to overspace, they need to be part of that decision-making. Tourism is a factor that takes up space, development for tourism, conservation, oil and gas, all impacts the lives and livelihoods of small-scale fishers. And it's not enough to join them to get them a seat at the negotiation table. They actually need a stronger voice. And I'm sorry to say, multi-stakeholder platforms are setting the agenda and they're squeezing out small-scale fisheries. So that is not justice for small-scale fisheries. My last part of justice is recognition. So when we look at the blue justice from a recognition point, it is concerned with the identities, the values, interest, knowledge, and are taken into account. So from a social justice perspective, it's just not recognizing the rights, but it is recognizing that small-scale fisheries has a right to a livelihood. They have a right to food, right to practice their tradition, custom, and culture. Far too often we find policymakers saying they recognize the importance of small-scale fisheries. It is important from a social justice lens, you go deeper in terms of what that really means. And when we look at spatial justice, in terms of recognizing small-scale fisheries, it is important that we need to remove the barriers of access for small-scale fishers when they are accessing resources for food and livelihoods. Remove the fine and remove gear confiscation and burning up of the gear. So for me to wrap up this conversation is to say that I know that my colleagues are going to dive in deeper and expand and give you examples in their country cases as to how this comes out. And I think it is important that when we're talking about blue justice now, we look at it from both a social justice lens on the one hand and also on spatial justice, especially when we're talking about the expansion of the 30 by 30 and also the expansion of the blue economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muniba, for this interesting perspective linking blue justice to social justice and spatial justice, particularly in the context of blue economy developments. It's very important we look into the concepts of recognition of small-scale fisheries, and meaningful participation for that matter. Thank you very much for this perspective. So let's move on to our next speaker. We have Mr. Pradeep Chatterjee joining from India. Pradeep has been associated with Small Scale Fishers Organization and movements in India since 2020. His contributions in small scale fisheries have been in policy interventions and building small scale fish workers organizations and networks. Currently, he is the national convener of the National Platform of Small Scale Fish Workers, NPSSFW. So, NPSSFW is the largest federation of unions of small scale fish workers in India, and the organization has an affiliate of from across 19 states in India, 19 states and union territories in India, and is engaged in both marine and inland sectors. Thank you, Pradeep, for joining us. So Pradeep will be taking us through advancing climate justice in small-scale fisheries, a pathway to sustainable livelihoods. Over to you, Pradeep.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Actually, greetings from NPSSFW. So I will start actually from Moni Viva's actually what she said, that, the small scale fishing communities, small scale fishers and fish farmers are by far the largest stakeholders. And also not only stakeholders, they are non-consumptive stakeholders of our water bodies. And because, and because good fish needs good water, they are the natural custodians of our water bodies and fish resources. So starting from this, actually, time is very short, so we shall actually directly go to the problems we are facing because of climate crisis. It reduces our fishing time. It reduces the fishing time of the fishers, and that's why we are under heavy pressure from the large-scale fishing communities, large-scale fishers, and also not only that, these encroachments, pollutions, etc. They reduce our catch. They reduce the catch of the small-scale fishers, so they have to extend their fishing time. And this climate crisis, it reduces our fishing time. It impacts fish drying activities, and the cyclones and storm surges, they destroy our fishing equipments, our habitats, even many lives are lost. Aquaculture ponds in inland, they are overflown, and salinization of ponds and fields actually they kills all fishes. So that is a problem. Then droughts and rains also are associated problems. These are unpredictable. They have become unpredictable and severe with this climate crisis. Drying up and overflow of rivers and water bodies intermittently and very frequently, they actually cause damage to fisheries. Weather has become very unpredictable, and the traditional knowledge of fishers regarding weather is actually failing to deliver. We cannot predict, the fishers cannot predict when the bad weather, inclement weather will come, and when they will get a very good weather for venturing into the sea or doing the other fisheries activities. Sea level rise, we all know that because of inundation, it's the erosion is also actually enhanced by sea level rise. And then salinity ingress. The salinity ingress in our rivers, which are connected to the sea, salinity ingress in the water bodies adjacent to our coasts. All these things are actually damaging fisheries, especially small-scale fisheries in those areas. Then there is a change in species composition of fish resources. This change actually suddenly makes our fishing gears and techniques unsuitable for fishing. Catch composition and the behavior of the catch also actually becomes very queer, and also these are unpredictable, and all our techniques are being questioned. The techniques are not being that effective, which were in the past. It is also associated with the inapplicability of traditional knowledge and market uncertainties, because if we cannot supply fish to the market regularly, then what happens, market also hits back. It also does not accept fish in the normal rate. And that there is drastic reduction in climate resilience due to anthropogenic causes. It is very, very important that pollution, encroachments, excessive diversion and consumptive use of water from water bodies, over and destructive fishing, these are actually reducing the resilience of the small scale fishers to climate crisis. They are actually reducing our capacity, the capacity of the small scale fish workers to address the climate crisis. And the further reduction in climate resilience is due to lack of adequate social security. In India, there is no scheme to provide financial support in the event of natural calamities. When some calamity comes, the government announces that support, some support, and that is grossly inadequate. No life or health insurance cover for small scale fishing communities are there. No insurance cover for fishing boats or gears. No insurance cover for housing. No scheme to develop climate resilient livelihood practices and housing. It is very important because you know that on our coast, all around our coast, the fishers are involved in fish drying, and fish drying actually comprises a big share of the business that the small scale fishers do. So with the inclement weather and with this fish drying system is actually it faces damage, it faces difficulties, so much so that the fishers face a great loss because the fish they try to dry it rots because of inclement weather. So there is every need for this to develop this climate resilient livelihood practices. And the extreme climate events we have faced, 18 cyclones from 2019 to 24, 97 floods, and 329 out of the 329 million hectares, 46 million were prone to flooding. Droughts are there. Around 125 districts across 23 states and union territories are facing drought-like conditions in 1924, this year. Heat waves are there. 18 states in the north, central, and peninsular India experienced 42 and 36 heat waves in 2020 and 2021. But there was a huge increase in heat waves in 2022. 203 was the number. So how the livelihood of the small-scale fishers are being weakened, because of the anthropogenic activities. In the year 1960, the small-scale fishers in marine sector, they fished for more than 88% of the total catch, and only less than 12% or around 12% catch was taken by the large-scale fishers. In 2022, we find that 18% of the catch is being taken by the small-scale fishers, whereas 82%, huge jump, 82% is being taken by the large-scale fishers. And if you look at the marine resource by depth, we find that from 0 to 100 meters depth, there is 86.62% resource, marine resource, potential resource is there. 100 to 200 meters, actually, they account for 5.87%. From 200 to 500 meters, it is 2.60%. And in the oceanic area, that is greater than 500 meters depth, is 4.91%. So it is very clear from here that the LSF is taking, that is the large scale fishing fisheries, is taking away the bulk of the catch, which was to be taken by the small scale fishers, because that is within the 0 to 100 meters depth. So, and there is pollution, there is encroachments, boats are coming up, tourism is coming up, waterways are coming up, and also, that inequitable fishing I have just now explained. In the inland fisheries, there is damming of rivers, encroachments on catchment and drainage areas. 110 inland waterways have been announced, and that is all the rivers, all the major rivers of India are now under this inland waterways scheme. And we are facing it and the riverine fisheries. Riverine fisheries is the most affected fisheries in India. Diversion of water from water bodies are there. River pumps are taking up water for irrigation, for industries, for municipal use, pollution, and intensive aquaculture. Government is sponsoring intensive commercial aquaculture, not only on the to produce shrimp. Not only it is on coastal shrimp aquaculture, they are also doing it in the reservoirs, putting in cages, which actually pollutes the water and damages fisheries of the open water. On top of this, the small scale fishers or fish farmers have no legal right to access water bodies, that is water commons, for sustainable fishing or fish farming. They are not even informed, later on consulted when some project comes up in some coastal areas or on rivers or on any water bodies or wetland areas. So, who are responsible for climate crisis? Rich countries, including the United States, Canada, Japan, and much of Western Europe, account for just 12% of the global population today, but are responsible for 50% of all the planet warming greenhouse gases released from fossil fuels and industry over the past 170 years. Also, the fossil fuel industry's disproportionate responsibility for historic greenhouse gas emissions, with the top 20 firms contributing 33% of historic emissions. And then there is lobbying by fossil fuel companies for regulatory preferences and subsidies. It has also given the leading emitters a hegemony over the industry, to the exclusion of the rational and development of renewable energies that the oil and gas companies themselves should have invested in decades ago. And then who are profiteering from climate business? This is monetizing misfortune through public money. Companies and business houses involved in relief, rehabilitation, and climate resilience building work are making huge profit down the value chain. These companies are getting huge subsidies from public exchequer. We are paying these companies twice, by taxes paid to the government and also by paying for the facilities provided. These companies are, more often than not, are linked to the corporate houses dealing with fossil fuel. Then what is climate justice? The small-scale fishers and fish farmers, with ancillary workers like fish retailers, fish dryers and sorters, net makers and repairers, have the least carbon footprints, yet they have to suffer the most. This is gross injustice. Justice is generally understood to mean that which is right, fair, appropriate, or deserved, with justice being achieved when an unjust act is redressed. Within the context of climate change, this means that the poorest countries and people should be supported by those who have contributed most to climate change. So the small-scale fishers, and especially the weaker sections of the small-scale fishers, the women, the tribal people, they deserve the most. They deserve most to be supported by this. This entails ensuring representation, inclusion, and protection of the rights of those most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Solutions must promote equity, assure access to basic resources, and ensure that young people can live, learn, play, and work in healthy and clean environments. So now NPSSFW actually resolves to, just a minute, raise the demand for climate justice so that the main culprits for the present climate crisis, the GHG releasing big business and corporate sectors, pay for the mitigation and adaptation measures, including the relief, rehabilitation, and reparation initiatives necessary to protect the small-scale fish workers as well as the other working people from the impacts of climate crisis, and adequately compensate them for the damages suffered both globally and nationally. NPSSFW also resolves to move the union and state governments to enhance the resilience of small-scale fish workers, to address climate crisis by restricting, minimizing, and stopping debilitating factors like over and destructive fishing, pollution, encroachment, and excessive diversion of water from water bodies. Also urge the union and state governments to come up with plans and schemes on climate resilient livelihood practices and habitat reconstruction for small-scale fish workers in general, and particularly in the floodplains, coastal areas, and wetlands through mandatory consultations with the small-scale fish workers. NPSSFW also resolves to address climate change impacts by informed actions of small-scale fish workers at multiple levels, including individual and community levels, along with strong and effective community interventions in the policy and governance of activities related to water bodies and fishing. Take up the challenges related with climate crisis with all urgency and seriousness, build community capacities through better understanding, stronger policy positions, and more effective interventions regarding local, regional, national, and international policies and governance structures. And also build national and international alliances to bring broader coalitions, as well as to bring central the issue of small-scale fisheries in climate negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you for sharing this perspective on day-to-day challenges of climate change and pollution on small-scale fisheries. The presentation very clearly shows how structural and governance factors accentuate the crisis and impact the resilience of small-scale fisheries. And this also reinstates the need for parametric insurance and other social security mechanisms, which has to be state-sponsored to support the lives and livelihoods of one of the most vulnerable communities, which is small-scale fisheries. Thank you so much, Pradeep. So let's move on to our next speaker, who is Marli Lucia de Silva Ferreira, joining us from Brazil. She's a fisherwoman and a coastal marine extractivist who is a resident of Cape Teperso Extractive Reserve in Bragança in the state of Pará. She's the Secretary of Fisherwomen at Confram Brazil, a position that places her as a woman who seeks to face her own challenges, always standing tall. Thank you very much, Marli, for joining us. And we are keen to hear your thoughts on conservative strategies amid blue economy developments and climate change challenges. Please, over to you, Marli.
Bom dia. Primeiro, agradecer por estar aqui, né, com essa imensa responsabilidade de representar meu país, representar as mulheres e a pesca artesanal. Infelizmente, nós vivemos o globo, o mundo globalizado vive um processo de aceleramento desenfreado da indústria do consumo, né? Isso nas falas ficam bem tonalizados de que nós somos semelhantes, né? E há muito tempo observa-se que nós precisamos mudar e urgente. Isso faz parte de um contexto de debates dentro de conferências, dentro de espaços onde a gente ocupa e faz uso da fala da urgência, da necessidade urgente de mudar. E aí eu trouxe aqui algumas contribuições do que nós precisamos fazer para tentar minimizar o avanço do mar e as mudanças do clima. E o foco, para mim, no meu ponto de vista, para tentar mudar isso, é através da educação, né? Hoje nós sabemos que a maioria dos pescadores artesanais, eles estão muito ausentes do processo de concepção do ambiente onde estão. milenarmente ou secularmente, a sociedade humana ela aprendeu a usar o ambiente como uma parte separada nossa, né? Nós aprendemos na escola ou em casa que o ambiente são árvores, são pássaros, são animais, são bichos, são peixes, e é água, é chuva, é o espaço, é o oxigênio. Não somos nós. Mas quando se pensa que é preciso fazer a reversão disso, incluindo o homem, eu digo o homem, a espécie humana, dentro desse processo da educação, para que ele possa ser, de fato e de direito, o cuidador do espaço, porque o planeta Terra é a nossa casa-mãe. E só é através da educação que nós podemos conceber isso e repassar às gerações. Então, eu trouxe aqui uma pequena contribuição para que a gente possa pensar melhor e dar mais visibilidade a essa contribuição, que é a valorização dos serviços prestados ambientalmente que os pescadores tradicionais, os pescadores artesanais fazem, preocupando com o ambiente e com o bioma marinho. Também precisamos pensar na valorização de servidores. Quem presta serviço à sociedade no âmbito da educação, no âmbito da saúde, no âmbito do ambiente, com a fiscalização, com a proteção, os serviços de proteção nas áreas marinhas, nos rios, nos mares, nas florestas de mangue, esse servidor ele também precisa ser reconhecido como um sujeito que tem valores, né? E como ele tem valores, ele precisa estar preparado, capacitado para fazer a atuação dentro desse sistema. Não está lá apenas pelo serviço, nem pela remuneração, mas sim pela qualidade do serviço que ele presta. O comprometimento com a educação é reformular e rever os critérios educacionais para as mudanças do clima. E isso é urgente, é muito urgente. Brigamos por tantas coisas, lutamos por tantas coisas, mas ainda não conseguimos nos enxergar enquanto sujeito ambiental. Está longe disso. Por mais que a gente tente, em algumas vezes, em algumas falas, em algumas abordagens, é necessário, é urgente se fazer isso com mais ênfase, com mais pessoas envolvidas, com mais movimentos, com mais organizações de base. E nessa valorização é preciso que a gente faça esse enfrentamento. Com relação à economia azul, as estratégias para garantir a participação social, ainda estamos muito longe nesse caminhar, no processo do conhecimento do que é isso. E eu acredito, e vou abrir um parêntese aqui, que quando a sociedade se organiza, quando ela tem esse pertencimento, esse conhecimento, ela passa a cobrar o seu direito, ela passa a dar opiniões daquilo que vai ferir ela diretamente. É preciso, através da educação ambiental, dentro das escolas, dentro dos espaços, que essas pessoas se apropriem do que é isso, né? Hoje se fala muito da economia azul no mundo, nesse mundo em que nós vivemos, em todos os países. E o foco está muito para a Amazônia. E eu, como mulher amazônica, como mulher do norte do Brasil, como pescadora artesanal, tenho muito essa preocupação, porque nós não sabemos, de fato, ainda é uma caixinha de segredo, ainda está muito guardado, que a gente busca na universidade O que é isso? Ah, eu não sei, precisa expandir, pois é, nós precisamos conhecer o que é isso, porque as coisas estão avançando, o mar está avançando, as florestas estão sendo destruídas, a pesca predatória está nos ferindo, está nos matando, deixando sem alimento, mas ainda tem um poder político que se perpetua no poder, que traz o asfalto para dentro das comunidades, que leva as empresas de turismo, que alicia os moradores, os pescadores artesanais a vender seus pequenos espaços para megas empreendedores que vêm com a ideia de construção de turismo, de empreendimento de eólica, de energia renovável, de energia limpa. Limpa para quem? Se nós não temos o conhecimento, o notório saber nosso tradicional está sendo substituído por tecnologias que nos colocam na marginalidade, na exclusão social. E aí é preciso ter estratégia para incluir, para agregar a inclusão desta sociedade no debate, reconhecer o trabalhador dentro das comunidades da pesca artesanal, que vivem diretamente e sofrem diretamente esses impactos, e são uma população que está na ignorância do conhecimento do que é isso, do que é esse desenvolvimento, estão à margem da participação do lucro dessa dita economia azul, desses projetos aí, e acabam sendo feridos de morte. E quem sofre com isso? Todos nós. Todas nós. Ninguém está com uma bolha blindada de uma catástrofe, blindada de um acidente que venha trazer miséria, morte e fome. Né? E aí, dentro dessa proposta, vem foco educação ambiental. Incluir nos meios da educação como prioridade nesse modelo. Não tratar o humano como parte desse processo que está fora, mas tratar ele como o fator principal. E para esse sistema, finalizando a minha fala, para esse sistema que nós vivemos hoje, no mundo globalizado, quanto maior a ignorância dos povos tradicionais, dos pescadores artesanais, para eles maior o lucro. E nós precisamos fazer a inversão, construir escolas nos tempos das marés, para que esses jovens, esses pescadores se apropriem da importância do bioma onde eles estão, onde fazem o seu ganho, o seu meio de vida. Isso, encerro a minha fala bem aqui e agradeço a minha participação. Obrigada.
Thank you very much, Marlene. Thank you for sharing your first-hand experience as a small-scale fisher on the linkages between humans and nature, and the need to value and recognition of fishers as a service provider. It's also important to note your very, very important questions on blue economy developments, as in whose development are we focusing on? What kind of technologies and development do we need in this particular context? So these are questions that we'll have to discuss further. Probably we'll have more interesting thoughts on this from our participants as well. So let's move on to the next speaker, who is Danny Setiawan, joining us from Indonesia. Danny is the chairman of Indonesian Traditional Fisher Folks Union. He's also the country convener of Southeast Asia Fisheries for Justice Network. Danny was a member of board of Indonesia for Global Justice from 2015 to 2020, and an assistant of Indonesian Presidential Special Staff Coordinator from 2017 to 2019. Thank you for joining the panel, Danny. And Danny is going to talk about advancing livelihoods, social development, and justice in small-scale fisheries through co-governance and co-management. Over to you, Danny.
Okay, Sifaja. Can I share the slide, or anybody will have to share the slide? Or
Please go ahead.
sorry.
You'll be able to do the sharing, yes.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name Danis Setiawan, and I'm trying to present about the advancing livelihood, social development, and justice in small-scale fisheries through the co-governance and co-management. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. I think I just to remind that our roles in small-scale fisheries in global sustainable development. There is some evidence and in our activities in some countries, in every countries, I think, that the small-scale fishers had important roles, in the economy, in creating job, and also the participation, in the women in the fishery sectors. And next slide. Sorry. There is four. The importance of the small-scale fisheries that we already know. I just to highlight and to make sure that we have a key in job creations. In every countries. In like our friends already presents, mentions before, that small-scale fishers in our country, that they have rules to creating a lot of job in our country, and also the importance of the small-scale fishers in production or in economy to build our country more sustainable, in the economy, and also the fulfilling food and nutrition needs by for our citizens, for the peoples, not only in our country but also the peoples in the world. And also the small-scale fisher playing a key in preserving cultural and environmental sustainability. I think as the fisher folk, we consider that the health of the ocean, the health of the sea is very important. We are depending on the health of the sea and health the coastal area. So I think, the importance role of the small-scale fisher in preserving, the environmental sustainability is one of our mission as the small-scale fishers or small-scale organizations. So therefore, there can be no food sustainability, poverty alleviation, or reduction in unemployment without the sustainability of small-scale fishers activities. Next slide. Next slide. I just highlight the important. Okay, I want to share to you, the situation of the Indonesian, the state of fisheries in Indonesia now. 97% of Indonesian fisher folk are small-scale or traditional fisher folks. So this is the huge amount of the fisher folk, and the fishers, the small-scale fishers, is dominate of the fishers activities in Indonesia. And also Indonesia is the second largest producer in the world, for capture fisheries and aquacultures, and the second largest producer of seaweed. So for Indonesia, the fishery sectors, like I said before, took important roles in our economy, in the production goods, the production of the food, not just only for our citizens, and also Indonesia also playing the important roles in the international fisheries trade. And also in the fourth quarter, for example, in 2023, the fishery sector contribute 2.73% to Indonesian gross domestic product, with a contribution value amount 35.718 billion US dollars. So the capture fishery sector provide millions of direct and indirect jobs in Indonesia, and also the fisher folk household are marked by high level of poverty and vulnerability due to ecosystem health decline and climate change. So this is what I want to highlight in these presentations. Next slide. This is also the picture of the socio-economic situation of small-scale fishers in Indonesia. From total 3 million peoples or fisher folk, 2.4 million number of marine fisher folk, and 600 more than 600 thousands of inland fisher folk. 11.34% of the people in the fishery sector are classified as poor peoples. So this is very tragic, in our situation. And if we compare with the poverty rates, in coastal area, 11% higher than non-coastal area. So the gap, the inequality between the coastal area and the non-coastal area in Indonesia is more higher, in terms of the poverty. That, as we know, in the coastal community, mostly of the peoples in coastal community, they have fisheries activities, from the there are fisher folk and also the for trading and etc. So the percentage of fisher folk education level. So this is also the situations, in our, based on our survey, and our research in last year, 74% of fisher folk communities have an education level of junior high school or lower. So I think the situation almost same, in some country. That's the condition, the socio-economic condition of the small-scale fishers, the coastal community, is the very tragic, and the poverty is very high, the inequality also is very high, the development gap, between the coastal community and outside coastal community. Next slide. But and also this is the situation of the extreme poverty. We counting from last 10 years. That's the national extreme poor population. Is actually decreased. From 60 million people in 2011 to 5.5 million people in 2022. But the anomaly that occurred in a coastal area, where the number of extreme poor people increased from 2.1 million people to 3.9 million people during the same period, last 10 years. So I think the numbers of poor people in coastal area also rose significantly, from 7.8 million people to 17.7 million people in 2022. Next slide. What we can from this situation, this is our reflection. This is our reflection. That's from 10 until maybe 20 years. From last 10 until 20 years, the progress of the regulation, or the institution of the fishery sector in Indonesia is getting more progressive. I think, because one example, we have the law number 7 of 2016, on the protection and empowerment of fisher folk, fish farmer, and salt farmer. I think this is also the breakdown, from the voluntary guideline for securing of small-scale fishers of FAO. Yeah, that's KNTI also include in this negotiation with the Indonesian government. So, but the irony, yeah, the situation in the socio-economic better.
Danny,
Yeah.
could you please conclude with the last point?
Okay.
Sorry, we are running out of time.
Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is also the situation. Yeah. Low and job diversification, economic burden. Yeah. Low job protection. Not enroll in social safety net program. Yeah. Next slide. Also, this is just for highlight in from our last survey. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. This is our initiative. Yeah. And next slide. Yeah, I just want to add one point on this. The improving of fisheries business ecosystem. So if we look at the government policy on the how they protect the small scale fishers, it's more partial than the comprehensive ones. Yeah, so we need the comprehensive policy from the how to improving the knowledge and skill of the small scale fishers, and also how how the government help the fisher folk to sell the fish to access the market, because the I just talked with another friends in some country like in Brazil, like in India. The situation is same. Yeah, now our small scale fisher, they difficult to sell the fish, because the price is more decreased in the last 3 or 4 months. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, the recommendations. Yeah. There is I think some point that we want to highlight. Especially how we ensure the implementation of regulation in the field, through strict supervision with an independent and transparent monitoring mechanisms, and imposing strict sanction on the failure to create deterrent effect, and also increasing and involving participation of fisher folk in decision making is already highlighted by our friend before, and also facilitating small scale fisher access to global market or domestic market, by providing regular quality certification training, and etc. Improving product quality through modern, environmentally friendly processing technology, effective logistic support through the establishment of fisher folk cooperative with professional management. And next slide, the last slide, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for discussing major questions on social development and need for targeted policies for small-scale fishers. And with this, let's move on to Elisa Flores, who is joining us from Mexico. And she works with Comunidad y Biodiversidad, and she'll be sharing her experience and discussing on empowering communities, building resilience through community-based solutions in small-scale fisheries. Lisa, over to you.
Okay, well, hi everyone, and thank you for the invitation. We're so happy to have this opportunity to discuss such an important topic with all the panelists. During my intervention, I will talk to you focus on the topic of community-based solutions and resilience in small-scale fisheries in the context of Mexico, and what COBI has learned through all these 25 years working together with small-scale fisheries. But first, I would like to take a brief moment to share with you what COBI is. COBI is for Comunidad y Biodiversidad. We are a Mexican NGO with 25 years of experience promoting marine conservation and sustainable fisheries through effective participation. We seek for a balance of capacity and opinions between those who have the power to influence the management of fishery resources and those groups of individuals who are traditionally not well represented among the impact by management decisions. Currently, we have a strong participation strategy, and we promote that current and future generation of fishers use and share their knowledge to co-design and implement solutions to achieve resilience communities and healthy oceans. So within these 25 years, we have worked hand in hand with fishing communities, and we have learned that fishing communities are always exposed to local and global impacts, but they are continually adapting and surfing these challenges. Fishers, women and men throughout the value chain demonstrate a unique ability to identify solutions that lead to sustainable fisheries and healthy oceans. When we notice these fishers' resilience and their creative solution based on their knowledge, their experience and information available, we start to connect them more and more and document those initiatives. We refer to as a solution as the activities that coastal community have implemented and address a problem that increase the resilience of the communities to short-term and global changes. And in turn, these solutions contribute to the health of the oceans and ecosystems. So we wanted to document these community-based solutions in a way that other people in other fishing communities could know what the challenge that drove those fishers to create the solutions were, what were the challenges and opportunities that the fishers identified, and how the solutions were implemented in order to be replicated. So to achieve this, COBI, together with small-scale fisherwomen and fishermen, developed a mobile app called Pescadata. This free app allows for fishers to record their fishing activity and fishing logbook. It also has a market section, weather forecaster section, etc. But the section I wanted to highlight here is that Pescadata has a community-based solutions section, which is a space to document, share, and scale community-based solutions, where fishers can share their ideas through collective action and connect with people that is involved in fishing. So to understand the impact of these solutions that have been documented by Fisher in Pescadata, in 2020, we start to analyze how these community-based solutions documented contribute to reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. So here I present a brief analysis of 186 solutions that are implemented in different regions of Mexico and Latin America, like Chile and Colombia, and how these solutions contribute to reach the SDGs. So we find that these solutions were documented by different fishing cooperatives, fisher, community groups, NGOs, the private sector, etc. And these solutions mainly contributed to the SDG 14, which is livelihood water, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, SDG 13, climate action, and SDG 5, gender equality. So I want to share with you some of the examples that we have seen through these years regarding the community-based solutions. And today, one of the solutions that Fisher have implemented are marine reserves. They have implemented 26 different marine reserves in Mexico, 20 marine protected areas that support effective management, 14 small-scale fisheries applying to international standards, and in total, 54 fishing communities have implemented solutions in Mexico together with COBI, which include 8,000 people trained and 223 publications. So we were observing that the challenges that people were facing in the fishing sector and in fishing communities in general were very similar, even in those fishing communities with thousands of kilometers apart. That it was a thing that the other panelists were mentioning too. So therefore, in 2020, we began to weave a national network of fishers with the intention that they would share their challenge, their achievements, their opportunities, and their knowledge with those fishers on the network. So today, this fisher network is integrated by 79 people, 36 women and 36 men and 43 women from 39 different fishing communities along the Mexican coast. These fishers together developed their own vision of the network for 2030, which is that the small-scale artisanal fisheries in Mexico have a single voice in which everyone is included and no one is left out. Another effort we carried out was during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we remain in constant contact with fishing cooperatives to learn about the solutions they were implementing and the challenges they were facing and how they were adapting to this new normality. So we conduct interviews regarding different topics as socioeconomic impact, the role of the state, community-based solutions, gender, health access, and technology. We interview more than 1,000 fishers in 77 different fishing communities of 18 states of Mexico. So we observed that the main challenges the fishers were facing were international markets plumbed and the domestic market decreased. 48 of these fishers stopped fishing because of the COVID pandemic, 49 continued fishing, and 11 were fishing only for self-consumption. Our recommendations, based on the work that we have been doing with fishers and all that we have learned, first is to provide greater training opportunities for women, for example, in financial management, use and technologies. Our recommendation is to facilitate women access to alternative and flexible financing. Also, it is important to break paradigms in the fishing sector regarding the involvement of youth and women in decision-making, aiming to address complex issues and more comprehensive and innovative. Also, it's important to ensure the equal participation of women and men in decision-making and leadership, as well as ensuring women and men have the same access to benefit. It is important to discuss financing and the cost of community-based solutions from its development to its replication. It is of vital importance to identify whether they are financially sustainable and replicable. At Gobi, we have observed that most of the initiatives towards sustainable fishing have been primarily focused on the present generation of men. Therefore, investing in youth and women is a strategic opportunity that must be taken. Additionally, we have learned that fishing communities and the solutions they have implemented invite the participation in a more cooperative and collaborative society. In other words, these solutions promote social cohesion. By documenting solutions, an opportunity is created for other coastal communities to learn about them and adapt them to their content, to their local context, finding responses to issues and challenges present. And to conclude my presentation, I would like to share with you that we have observed the unique ability of fishing communities to identify and implement solutions related to sustainable activities in the ocean. So it is time now to replicate the solutions and learn from the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for sharing the perspective on community-based solutions, particularly incorporating women and youth in the process. Now we have Enrique Quefales, who is the Executive Coordinator at Linha d'Água, joining us from Brazil. Enrique will be talking about integrating climate change adaptation, marine spatial planning, and tenure rights to enhance food security in small-scale fisheries. Over to you, Enrique.
Olá a todos e todas, o meu nome é Henrique Quefales, eu faço parte de uma organização da sociedade civil no Brasil, que se chama Instituto Linha d'Água. É um prazer enorme estar com vocês aqui hoje, eu agradeço ao convite feito especialmente pela Civaja, em nome da Rise Up, mas também de todos os demais aqui presentes. Gostaria de agradecer essa oportunidade. Eu escolhi falar em português para conseguir fazer essa mensagem chegar principalmente aqui no nosso contexto nacional, mas também para que eu possa estar dialogando aqui com a minha colega Marli, que está participando também, e que a gente consiga fazer chegar essa mensagem em outras partes do território nacional. E claro que com o apoio aí da tradução, mas também depois a gente conseguindo levar isso para outros idiomas. Eu gostaria de, num primeiro ponto, colocar da importância de termos essa centralidade das comunidades tradicionais pesqueiras na busca pelas soluções dos desafios globais que nós temos enfrentado, tanto no âmbito das mudanças climáticas, mas em termos das mudanças ambientais em geral, que a gente vem encontrando no planeta. A gente tem visto, pelas falas que me antecederam aqui hoje, de que os impactos são sentidos sobretudo nessas comunidades. Os efeitos das mudanças climáticas, dos eventos extremos, eles recaem sobretudo sobre as comunidades tradicionais pesqueiras ao longo de todo o planeta, e isso coloca a necessidade de, como já foi dito aqui hoje também, que nós tenhamos abordagens de justiça socioambiental, espacial, territorial, de gênero, para atender especialmente essas populações que são mais afetadas por esses eventos. E isso envolve também uma necessidade de uma abordagem de justiça ou democratização econômica, financeira. Ou seja, é preciso que os esforços de destinação de fundos, de recursos financeiros para a sustentação desses modos de vida estejam destinados às comunidades tradicionais pesqueiras. Com isso, eu quero dizer que a gente precisa defender uma perspectiva de constituição de fundos comunitários que atendam especialmente essas comunidades e que eles possam ser instituídos a partir de movimentos e processos protagonizados por essas comunidades, no sentido de que a gente precisa reduzir os custos de intermediação desses fundos e conseguir fazer com que eles sejam diretamente aportados a essas organizações comunitárias que já detêm as soluções para se adaptarem a esses desafios colocados pelos eventos extremos das mudanças climáticas. E isso significa, para além do aporte de recursos da ordem internacional, que podem estar sendo mobilizados, sobretudo pelos países causadores das grandes transformações ambientais e climáticas, mas também que os governos nacionais consigam destinar recursos de investimentos na infraestrutura dessas comunidades, bem como no incentivo à produção sustentável nesses territórios. A gente sabe a importância que a produção pesqueira tem nas comunidades, na segurança alimentar das pessoas, das comunidades, ou seja, esse alimento ele tem num primeiro plano, a sua destinação para o consumo interno e alimentação dessas pessoas, mas também é um produto que levanta os recursos necessários para a aquisição de outros insumos que garantem essa segurança alimentar. Por exemplo, a aquisição de outros alimentos, grãos, que não são muitas vezes produzidos nessas comunidades, mas também no acesso à energia para cozinhar, para poder, de fato, manter as suas moradias e as suas condições de produção, de preparação e produção dos alimentos. Então, nós precisamos que, de fato, hajam linhas de crédito dotadas nos países, especialmente no sul global. A gente percebe uma baixa conversão dos incentivos fiscais e financeiros dos governos para sustentar a produção de pequena escala, principalmente no âmbito da pesca artesanal. No âmbito da agricultura familiar, a gente encontra uma organização de movimentos, de sindicatos, de organizações representativas que conseguem fazer uma maior conversão desses recursos, mas ainda no âmbito da pesca artesanal, da pesca de pequena escala, essa conversão de incentivos e recursos dos próprios governos nacionais para, para a produção das comunidades ainda encontra bastante resistência em termos de destinação direta dos governos para essa produção. Então, nesse sentido, esse fortalecimento dessas economias, da sociobiodiversidade dessas comunidades é que vai conseguir trazer também uma representatividade sobre a necessidade da garantia territorial que essas comunidades necessitam para conseguir reproduzir os seus modos de vida. Ou seja, quando a gente encontra um processo de planejamento espacial marinho, recorrentemente é colocado na questão como priorizar a determinação desses territórios de pesca artesanal, de pequena escala, nesse processo de planejamento espacial marinho, se sequer é possível afirmar a relevância socioeconômica, o número de pessoas envolvidas nessa atividade, então trazer essa representação do ponto de vista econômico, de uso tradicional, de dependência desses modos de vida, para que isso ganhe a visibilidade necessária e os argumentos para sua determinação nesses processos de planejamento espacial a nível nacional. Então, para isso, nós precisamos ainda de um grande fortalecimento da tomada de dados, da construção dos dados que vão subsidiar essa colocação desse setor como relevante nesses processos de planejamento espacial marinho, e essa construção de dados envolve tanto uma agregação entre conhecimento técnico científico quanto conhecimento tradicional do mundo dessas comunidades e a sua capacidade de autodeterminação e produção de informações, né? Então, acho que esses são elementos que nós precisamos construir a nível global para que nós tenhamos uma visibilidade desses territórios e a colocação deles como estratégia fundamental de defesa da qualidade ambiental do planeta, planetária, e assim como de garantia da permanência desses modos de vida para as gerações atuais e futuras. Acredito, Siva, já ainda still remain some time?
Could you please conclude, Enrique?
Ok. Bom, então, nesse sentido, sobre a afirmação da relevância desses territórios do ponto de vista dos processos de planejamento espacial marinho, a gente gosta ainda de afirmar a relevância que isso tem em um contexto dentro dos objetivos e das metas colocados na Convenção da Diversidade Biológica. Hoje se pretende expandir a 30% de proteção do planeta, seja em terra, seja em água, e houve um avanço nessa compreensão acerca do reconhecimento dos direitos territoriais de povos e comunidades tradicionais. Então, hoje já existe consenso e determinação científica de que esses territórios produzem capacidade de conservação dos espaços superior às estratégias de fechamento de
Enrique, can
áreas.
we conclude, please?
Ok? Então, nós precisamos avançar no reconhecimento desses territórios tradicionais como uma grande estratégia de conservação dos espaços naturais e de garantia desses modos de vida que são sustentáveis nesses territórios. Obrigado.
Enrique. And the last speaker, we have Ms. Edithrorit Lukanga joining us from Tanzania. She's the founding Secretary General of FishNet and has been engaged in the implementation of SSF guidelines in Tanzania. Over to you, Edithrorit.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sivadia, for this very beautiful introduction. And I thank everyone in this meeting. I greet you all. So for me, I think this conversation is timely. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay, thank you. So for me, I think this conversation is timely because especially now that it is the 10th anniversary of the SSF guidelines, but also in the African context, we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the PFRS. This conversation is happening at the very right moment right now as we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the SSF guidelines, but also in the African context, we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the policy framework and reform strategy for fisheries and aquaculture. So this is very, very important. And I'll try to be quick because speaking last, most of the items that I wanted to mention have already been mentioned. And next slide, please. Yeah, anyway, so just to give you a little bit of a context regarding women in small-scale fisheries in Africa, but also globally. Women play a very significant role in the sector, and they are an integral part of the whole fisheries, whereby in the African context, more than 70% of those who are working in the post-service section are women. So today, in this conversation where I'm going to share some best practices, I would like to bring to this conversation regarding the whole aspect regarding collective action. And I'm going to use OWFISHNet as an example of small-scale fish organizations, and particularly women's organizations that are actively involved in the policy and other processes that are of significant to them. In the context of climate change and how it impacts women, climate change and other emerging challenges are pose significant risk to small-scale fisheries, and including issues around raising sea levels and changing ocean temperature, but also increasing frequency of extreme weather events, and a lot of other have been mentioned by the previous speakers. And these changes affect the whole small-scale fisheries sector, but women are affected disproportionately, and they are the ones who often face or have the limited access to resources. And when it comes to access, I really wish to underline the issue of access to information, access to resources, access to technology, access to decision-making, and all the other relevant access issues whereby women are the most significantly impacted. And to address such kind of issues or these challenges, it is imperative that actors prioritize human rights within the framework of the SSF guidelines. Next slide, please. And the use of human rights-based approach, I see it is very, very, very important in a way that it ensures that all stakeholders, particularly women, have equal access to resources, have equal access to opportunities, but also in the decision-making, but also issues around technology. And if you are following closely, look at the pictures that I'm sharing. They share the realities on the ground. They share the situation that women are going through, especially when it comes to access to fish as a resource. Because for them, in order to process fish, they have to access fish from the fishers after they land. But now with the impact of climate and changing weather patterns, rainfalls, water levels have increased, and therefore, so it affects in two different ways. During drought, fishers are not able to land, to land their fish to come to the landing site, and therefore women have to work, even including other small-scale fishers, men and youth have to walk longer, going down further in the waters. But also during this time now, when it's really raining, they have also to immerse themselves in the waters to go fight for fish. But also now this is coupled with the increasing demand for fish, increased pressure also to fish, but also the limited availability of fish. So the demand is higher than the availability of fish. So this all affects significantly the whole issue around access to fish as a resource. Next slide, please. So with this now, when we're talking about the best practices, as I mentioned, I would like to bring up the whole issue around collective action. And I'm going to share this experience of having this continental network of women in small-scale fisheries in Africa, which is called OWFISHNet, African Women Fish Processors and Traders Network. We have already heard a lot about the significance of women in the small-scale fisheries, the role that they play, it's the previous one, the role that they play in the sector, and therefore, and also their significance in number, not just on what they do, but also in number. In African context, for example, more than 70% of women who work in the post-harvest section, post-harvest section of the small-scale fisheries sector are women. And therefore, it is very, very important that they are part and parcel of all the processes that are happening along the value chain. And this is one of the reasons why AoFishNet was formed, in order to advocate for inclusive governance. It has been explained already about this, in order to work around, advocating for equal access to resources and service, access to education and awareness, climate adaptation and climate and adaptation strategies, but also other emerging issues such as blue economy and the issues that come along with it, but also to advocate for inclusive legal and policy reforms. So all these are very, very significant, and AoFishNet as an institution has been striving since it was formed in 2017, and it has invested heavily in strengthening the capacities, next slide please, in strengthening the capacities of its members through various processes. Like right now, AoFishNet has a presence in 44 countries, and the work, yes.
Can we conclude with the recommendations, please?
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay,
Sorry to
so
interrupt.
yeah, the time is also very short. Okay, so I just wanted to share this significant example that happened in 2020. I mean, in 2020, when AoFishNet participated in this study on the impact of COVID-19 to women fish processors and traders in the sub-Saharan Africa. And it developed a set of 10 recommendations that you are seeing there. But then these ones, we simplified them into a set of 3 recommendations, which is in the next slide, please. And the first one is to ensuring that to secure women's assets and finance to enable recovery. So this is just an example that happened in the context of COVID-19, but also similar example could be used now in the era of climate change, but also transforming decision-making processes to ensuring that equal voices of women in governance and fisheries and food systems and other related processes, women are well represented in there. But also it's important and very significant to invest in women, fish processors and traders in technical, human, digital, and collective capacities. And I think the previous speakers have also talked about that. So to conclude, the next slide, please. I wish to make a call that it is important to have continued support to the small-scale fishers and fish workers, particularly women's organizations, in the implementation of the SSF guidelines. Now that we are celebrating the 10th anniversary, it's time to reflect on past, present, and the future, and make use of these recommendations to advance and improve on what is working and address what is not working well. And therefore, we need to have resources in terms of financial resources and support organizations such as these women's organizations and other small-scale fish organizations in order to be part and parcel of the SSF guidelines implementation, but also implementation of other relevant national, regional, and international instruments, but also participate in their monitoring in order to really track the progress of the implementation. This is very, very important because we can have a number of these instruments, but if they are not implemented, it means it's nothing. And then to finish off, it's the fact that once this is done, it can help to recognize and address the unique challenges faced by the women, faced by other small-scale fisher organizations, but also in ensuring that the small-scale fisheries communities can thrive, but also can contribute to the broader goals of social justice and environmental sustainability. So having said that, I would like to thank you. Go to the last slide, please. I would like to thank you very much. And if we have time, I'm willing again to share more in details about the OWFISHNet and what it has been able to do within just a very short period of time since it was established, and bringing women together through a collective action where they could have their voices raised and contribute at the national level to where now these international and regional policy decisions are being implemented. Thank you, Sivaja.
Thank you, Edith Judith, and thank you for all the panelists and the participants. We're really sorry for the delays, but Edith Judith, since you mentioned gender justice and equity, there is a quick question from Dr. Stella Williams here. So her question is how the small-scale fishers are impacted by governance and policy in terms of the gender-based equity and justice. Could you please take 30 seconds? Just stick to 30 seconds if possible and answer the question before we conclude.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. This is a very important question because, you know, the whole element of governance and policy decisions, they significantly shape the experiences and opportunities for women in the small scale fisheries. So I'm responding on that in the women's perspective because I've been talking about that. And in order to achieve gender-based equity and justice, it is essential to implement inclusive policies that recognize and address the unique challenges faced by women, but also faced by now all the small scale fishermen, fisher women, all the small scale fisheries actors, ensuring their participation in decision making, but also providing equitable access to resources and opportunities. And by doing so, I believe that we can create a more just and sustainable future for small scale fisheries. I hope I've responded to that, Professor.
Yes.
Sarah.
Thank you so much, Edith Judith. And in continuation with the webinar, we will be sending across a set of recommendations, probably 5 of them, for the comments and suggestions of participants. Please respond to that by the 25th of this month so that we can share the final document with the G20 processes. Thank you very much for your time and apologies for the delay. Thank you so much.